Okay, so we are live, everybody.
Okay. I'll give it, my computer's not quite on 5 yet. I like to be punctual, but not too early. All right, let's go. It's 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to the ordinance meeting. This is a special ordinance meeting for July 9th, 2020. Today we will be reviewing the proposed 5G ordinance that's been before this committee since last January. Subsequently we have had first reading and a public hearing. If we could have a roll call first, and Don Hamill.
Here.
Ken Johnson.
I'm here.
And G. Marie Caterina, as chair, is here. Also in attendance is Jay Chase as staff, and Larissa Crockett, who will be taking the minutes. And Larissa is the official host, so to speak, of the committee. Because I have trouble walking and chewing gum sometimes. So I thank her for doing that for me. We have past minutes. Can I have a motion to accept the minutes?
So
Anybody? So moved. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor, any discussion, excuse me. All those in favor of accepting the minutes, please. I keep remembering, I've got to go down through. Mr. Hamill,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
and that's a yes for Ms. Caterina. All right, now on to this. I've written a couple of notes here because there seems to be some consternation and some concerns about the format of the meeting. I will tell the public that the format of this meeting is no different than any other ordinance meeting. It's a reminder that technically ordinance meetings are working meetings of a town council committee. We don't make decisions for the council, but we vet and listen to different options and then make decisions as to what will move forward or not and whatever. As I mentioned before, this subject has been before this committee since last January. As a matter of fact, I have a memo dated December from Mr. Chase, and I believe it was supposed to be in December and we got snowed out, as I'm recalling. But that being said, so it's not like this is new or just being sprung on folks. However, due to concerns expressed by a few constituents and Councillor Gleistine, I did agree to bring this back to ordinance for brief review, given some concerns. And this is how the meeting will occur. And yes, it was decided. Someone asked if this was a decision of the whole committee, and yeah, it's no different than any other way we run these committees. We are under no legal obligation to take any testimony. However, I believe that folks can be allowed to weigh in appropriately where possible. Therefore, all speakers, whether they're industry or not, will be given 3 minutes, and we will dedicate 15 minutes, the first 15 minutes, to speakers. Again, regardless of whether they're industry or constituents, and I'm going to bounce back and forth between folks. I would ask that you please direct your comments to this ordinance only and specifics of this ordinance, and in particular, your particular concerns with a section or whatnot of the ordinance. I don't want to hear of any health concerns under federal law that cannot be taken into consideration. And when in regards to these facilities, frankly, privacy concerns or any unrelated topics, I would prefer not to be addressing tonight. We want to get to the topic, which is the ordinance. And how can we, if we need to, make any changes to the verbiage thereof. If you do have any questions or comments after the public input, I would ask that you email them to the town council email, and that is towncouncil@scarboroughmaine.org, and every counselor will see it. Let's see. I am going to read it. I was asked to read this into the testimony, and I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to do so. This is from the Scarborough Community Chamber of Commerce. Dear Ordinance Committee members, I'm writing on behalf of the Scarborough Community Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors in support of the town adopting a new wireless facility ordinance to support technology's growth in town. At the June 24th board meeting, we discussed the topic and the theme was clear that improved cellular service in our town would be a great enhancement to our residents and businesses, which led to a unanimous vote in support of the new ordinance proposal. The difficulty with cell coverage in Scarborough is well known. The dropped calls or inability to send and receive data is the norm and ranges depending on what provider you have and where you are located in town. Now with the COVID-19 pandemic, working remotely is a reality for many more people and will continue in a full or part-time capacity moving forward. This has highlighted the need to allow companies to enhance their service area and wireless broadband capabilities in town. The ability, for companies to move to small cell wireless will achieve these goals in the short and long term as we move forward in 5G technology. We commend the town for reviewing this ordinance and for working with staff and cell providers to bring the ordinance into compliance with state and federal law, while also allowing for some oversight and ability to charge reasonable rentals to service providers on public structures. We hope this new ordinance will quickly accelerate the installment growth of small cell facilities in our town, benefit all of our residents and businesses, and continue to allow Scarborough to thrive as a desirable place to work and live in Southern Maine. And that was submitted by Dennis Meehan, who is the president of the Scarborough Chamber of Commerce. And thank you for letting me read that in. Mr. Meehan was planning to read that, but the Sea Dogs are having some sort of a golf tournament tonight. He's the manager of the Sea Dogs, who couldn't be here. All right, with that being said, let's open this hearing. If you have some questions, if you could raise your hand at this time, and then I'm going to go down through. And so if you would click the little raise your hand, where is that, Larissa, on the?
I'm not sure what the participants are seeing on their screen, Jean Marie. I apologize. I can only see what's on my screen as host, and I don't need to raise my hand.
There should be a raise your hand place somewhere.
Typically at the bottom of the page.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's at the bottom.
But it depends on how folks.
Oh, wait a minute. We got someone who's an expert. There's a hand at the bottom of the screen in the middle. Thank you, Mr. Cohen. All right. That being said, I'm going to start with Mr. Jim Cohen, if you wouldn't mind. We're gonna lie in. We don't do pictures when people are speaking, and if you could keep it to 3 minutes. Jim, are you there?
I am, Chair Katerina. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, if you could start,
Perfect.
that would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Katerina, members of the committee. My name is Jim Cohen. I am a resident of Portland and a lawyer with the Verrill Law Firm, and I'm appearing today verbally on behalf of Verizon to speak in support of the ordinance that's before you today. but with the amendments suggested by a coalition of wireless providers that I submitted in writing last week, and hopefully the committee has that. First, let me say I appreciate on a firsthand basis the balance that the council is trying to achieve with this ordinance. I spent 6 years on the Portland City Council. I helped form and served as chair of the North Steering Neighborhood Association. I'm a former president, current advisory trustee of Portland Trails, was the first mayor in Maine to sign on to the U.S. Conference of Mayors Climate Action Plan. I've also spent nearly 25 years working with the Maine DOT and public utilities in Maine, including with regard to right-of-way issues. I was the liaison to the MDOT Utilities Task Force on behalf of all utilities in Maine in the late 1990s, and I helped draft the utility facility location rules currently used by MDOT to site poles and wires in the public right-of-way. That's essentially what the town is looking to do with the small cell wireless facilities ordinance, and those facilities are considered utility facilities covered by the state's utility location permit system entitled 35A. I also helped draft and get passed the 2019 legislation that makes clear that small wireless facilities are deemed to be permitted uses for zoning purposes, but subject to state and local permitting as provided in Title 35A. And my understanding is that today's draft ordinance is before the council because of this 2019 law, or at least in part because of it. I'm actually participating in today's meeting remotely from a family vacation in Carabasset Valley, and it's amazing that I'm able to participate as easily as if I were right at home or with all of you. And that only happens because of telecommunications infrastructure, which is why it is so important for the town to modify its ordinances to allow small wireless facilities in the public right-of-way. Because without this infrastructure, businesses, residents, and travelers will be less able to work remotely, stay connected with friends and family, and to stay plugged in while on the road. In today's COVID-19 world, the importance of telecommunications is only further underscored. The written comment submitted by the Coalition of Carriers includes lots of suggestions, but at a high level, there are two important themes. One, ensuring that small wireless facilities are treated in a non-discriminatory manner as compared to other pole attachments, including electric transformers or cable company Wi-Fi systems, which have a similar visual size and impact and are allowed to be on utility poles. This is how MDOT handles small wireless facilities on state and federal highways and is required by both state and federal law. Second, separating out within the ordinance two distinct issues of town oversight. One, instances where the town is acting as a licensing authority for facilities attaching to private utility poles like CMP or Consolidated. And two, instances where the town is acting as a lessor and essentially charging rent for small cell facilities attached to town-owned poles, like light poles. The current
Jim,
yes.
you're at your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Are you about ready?
I have one sentence.
Okay.
Which is basically that our suggestions try to separate out those two concepts, which if not fixed results in anomalies. So with that, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, Ben Smith, please. Ben, are you there? Ben?
I've given him permission to speak and he should be showing on your screen as a blank
Yeah.
box.
Ben?
Does he have to do something to unmute himself?
He does need to do something to unmute himself.
He's muted. Ben, you just muted yourself.
Something? They have to hit a space bar.
Ben? All right, we'll go, remind me to go back to Ben if I forget. Sue Foley Ferguson.
So you're good to go if you can unmute yourself?
Okay, I'm unmuted, but I was under the impression that Betsy Gleason, before I made comments, was going to go over the suggested comments that some residents put forward.
She's going over that after. So do you have comments? Because your clock's running.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, I guess the first thing I would mention is that I'm formally going to ask the members of this committee and the town council to file an injunction for those 5Gs that are already being installed in the community. They do not have permits, and according to state law, they do need permits. And I realize this might be two attorneys arguing whether or not they do. However, I do know what the intent of the legislature was. And I sent to Larissa just now the amendments in that committee that stated that these are facilities, even if they are on existing poles, and that they need to require permits. Okay, that's my first comment. My second comment is I want to applaud Betsy for the hard work. And I think it's outrageous that we're not going to have a discussion about this. We have not seen any amendments or suggested ideas from the AT&T or Verizon or anybody. So as a community, you guys are being asked to make decisions, and we can't even comment on those because we haven't seen them. So I'm just going to focus because I just have a few minutes. I could go through each of these, but the one thing that I'm going to focus on is this, that I think this whole location that you have the right as a town. Don't be enamored by what an attorney for these telecoms say is necessary for conductivity. This is really about self-driving cars, and this isn't about telephones and this kind of access to Zoom that we have right now. This is about connecting self-driving cars and Internet of Things in your house. Okay, so it is a whole advanced thing. And since we're getting it shoved down our throats, which we are all over the country, you should know about the lawsuits that are going on, but you should also, as representatives, think about getting us the Cadillac. Yes, we got to have it. Yes, we have to accept it. Yes, but let's get the Cadillac. Let's not get the Chevy. So don't just assume that we can't do things because someone just told you can't do things. Find out the real facts. Regarding, I would rather see, we put this together with Betsy, but I would rather see us eliminate it from residential zones. But since we're talking about right-of-ways, and since we're talking about just right-of-ways, I don't have to talk about non-residential.
Sue, your 3 minutes is up.
Geez, see what I'm saying? It's really, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I have one
Thank
more.
you. No, you're
I
all
have one more
set.
sentence, but you let
No.
but you let him do one more sentence. You let
One sentence. Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think it's would be extremely that the public would be extremely happy if this committee would seriously consider our amendments one by one and look at this in a very detailed manner, because it's a big deal. 500 feet from a residential areas is a very important point.
Okay, thank you. Next, Ben Smith, are you ready to talk? Ben?
This mic is showing as open, you know.
I know. Ben, we can't hear you. All right. Can't get Ben. Sorry, Ben. Beth Ann Cooley, please. Go ahead, Beth Ann.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak before you this evening. My name is Beth Cooley. I am the Assistant Vice President of State Legislative Affairs at CTIA. CTIA is the trade association for the wireless communications industry. I am here to provide information pertaining to the next generation of wireless networks, commonly referred to as 5G or fifth generation. 5G has the potential to provide tremendous benefits, both economically and socially. We encourage this committee to take steps to facilitate the deployment of this technology and to position the town for the future. In that vein, I am supportive with amendments, the industry amendments that were sent to the committee. Before I dive in talking about 5G, I just want to level set on the current status of wireless in Maine. The people of Maine continue to demand access to wireless products and services. And this is demonstrated by the fact that there are as many wireless devices as there are people in Maine, and nearly half of Maine residents live in wireless-only households. Now, these demands from our customers, your constituents, require that wireless networks be both updated to meet today's existing demand and readied for the next generation of wireless services. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the need for connectivity, which has been thrust into the spotlight in recent months due to the ongoing COVID-19 crisis. This is a public health emergency, and it has highlighted just how important it is for wireless communications to be reliable, fast, and prepared to handle increased demand. Now, this is where enter 5G. 5G is an exciting economic development time. The deployment of 5G technology, commonly called small cells, will serve as an economic catalyst, which Accenture has found will provide tremendous economic benefits within local communities. Specifically, Accenture estimates that wireless operators will invest as much as $275 billion nationwide of their own money, not taxpayer dollars, creating up to 3 million jobs and adding approximately $500 billion to the US GDP. In the city of Scarborough specifically, 5G deployment may create nearly 200 jobs and increase GDP by over $32 million. Now, in terms of what's happening on the 5G front around the country, as was mentioned previously, 28 states, including Maine and Puerto Rico, have enacted legislation to streamline the deployment of small cells. In addition, the federal government, through the FCC in 2018, issued its state and local wireless infrastructure order on small cells. Effective January 14 of 2019, the order establishes guardrails for presumptively reasonable fees for both recurring and non-recurring small cell events. It establishes new shot clocks, as well as requires aesthetic requirements that they be reasonable, objective, non-discriminatory, and published in advance. I have submitted more thorough testimony for you all, which I want to be respectful of your time, but those were my comments for this evening, and I'm happy to take any questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Good job. You're right on that 3-minute mark. Let's see. Ben Smith, Larissa, what do you think we should do?
We can try to promote him to a panelist, and I'll just turn off his camera. So Ben, please make sure that you are fit to be seen for the brief moment you're going to be live on camera before I do that. Here we go. Let's trust.
Hi, can people hear me?
Yes, yay. Okay, Ben, sorry about that.
No, obviously it was a technological issue on my side. I'm sorry for that. And I thank you very much for your patience.
Sure, go ahead.
So I'm appearing tonight via Zoom on behalf of Ms. Boxer. And I just wanted to share some additional thoughts that we've had based on my discussions with her. And the first thing I'd just like to point out based on Ms. Foley-Ferguson's statement is that this ordinance does not in any way try to regulate facilities outside of the right-of-way. Now, the town would have the ability to do that, but it doesn't in any way try to impose such regulations. The only regulation that I think is being conducted here is for facilities within the right-of-way. There are additional things that the town could do that the current ordinance is not handling, and I would bring these to your attention. First, I understand that section 4362, which really is meant more applicable to be, or meant to be more applicable to DOT type situations involving state facilities, does not require notice by applicants, but the town under Title 30A has the ability to require notice of applications to be provided to abutters, and I think that would be appropriate here. The other thing that I think would have to go along with that process would be there should be some initial determination of completeness of the application, and that's absent from the draft ordinance. So without a determination of completeness, you don't really have the ability to trigger the shot clock from even for happening. There should be a clear application review process. The review team, I understand, is given that authority, but maybe you want to have a planning board conduct review for new ordinances and maybe the CEO for renewals. There should be requirements for applicants to demonstrate the infeasibility of co-location and why facilities can't be co-located. I understand there's a facility, or there may be 3 facilities that have already been installed. It was unclear to me under what authority those were installed, and that's something that I'd like to maybe hear from members about. There's a penalty provision under the draft ordinance, and it refers to section 4452 of the statute. Obviously, it would be in the town's interest to ensure that it could also recoup attorney's fees. That's something that it should include in there. The renewal provision of the ordinance requires no affirmative review by the town. I think that's probably a mistake. There should be some affirmative right of the town to review and process and approve the renewals on an annual basis. And the biggest problem, I think, is really what happens if these facilities become obsolete, the entities that own them become insolvent or defunct. What protection is there to make sure that they can be removed? And what source of funds is going to be there to actually ensure that they can be removed? The town could impose insurance or surety or bond requirements. That's something that's very common. I think in the lease, that's something that would want to be explored and perhaps added to the ordinance. I don't know if I'm at my 3 minutes or beyond.
Yeah, you are.
Well,
It just went off. You got one more sentence? Whoops.
Well, the only thing I'd like to do is reserve the right to maybe submit written comments. If we
Oh,
could.
absolutely. Absolutely. Town council at ScarboroughMaine.org.
Okay, very good. And if there's any questions that people have for me, obviously I would entertain those now.
Yes, and I have your contact info too. So, all right. We all
Okay.
have it.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Ben. Yeah, no, when I appreciate it, and I apologize for any mix-ups there. Owen Smith, please.
Good evening, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Owen.
Hello there. And I'm getting an echo.
You're okay here. Owen? Owen?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm getting quite an echo. I'm not sure why.
Do you have
Yeah,
another
you're,
device nearby? If you may want to turn it off or get it away from your laptop, I'm not sure. Sometimes that's a cause. But I'm not a technical expert, so.
technology is great when it works. Owen, do you want to present?
Yeah.
You're
I will-
my last person. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and Councilor Hamel, Councilor Johnson. Thank you for the opportunity for me to be here and speak with you today. My name is Owen Smith, and I'm the state president for AT&T here in Maine. I live in Durham, and my offices are AT&T offices are located at one in Scarborough, and we've been there for about 10 years. I'm here today in support of the efforts, your efforts to date, with the amendments that the industry has submitted. We appreciate you letting us work with the town of Scarborough, which AT&T has. We appreciate that. And as Jim and Beth have mentioned, AT&T, along with the other major providers, have recently provided comments on the draft ordinance. We hope that the ordinance will provide Scarborough with reasonable oversight on safe installation and aesthetics, small wireless facilities that we're talking about, but also promote rapid and efficient deployments, meet the demands of our customers and also your constituents. And obviously that it applies with state and federal law. So why is this important to AT&T? Traffic on the AT&T network has grown 580,000% since 2007. We're changing the way that we communicate. Mainers are changing the way that we communicate. Maine has seen a 260% increase in wireless phone subscribers since 2000. And since 2010, the number of wireless-only households has more than doubled to more than half, as Beth has mentioned earlier. There's been an increase of 6,000% in broadband subscribers. And along with that, 68% decrease in switched access lines, which is the plain old telephone. So Mainers are cutting the cord like the rest of the country. So there's a limited number of things that we can do to fix that. We can deploy more spectrum, which I think we're all doing, but there's a limited supply. We can improve spectrum efficiency that we're doing, enhance capacity with new technologies. We can build more traditional macro sites, the big towers, which we're doing all over the state. And then we can deploy small cells, which brings the network closer to the user. And it'll be critical on the next 5G technology, including smart cities and the Internet of Things. So basically, I've given a couple of slides, which I don't need to go over, but some pictures of small cells that we've done around New England, including here in Maine, and also a description of a macro site compared to a small cell, both a 4G and a 5G. So again, thank you for your time. We look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. You came in right at that 3-minute mark. Thank you, Owen. I appreciate it very much. If you would stick around in case anyone has questions from the committee, that would be appreciated. Last but not least, Ms. Allison Bristol, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. I won't take up much of your time. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think I sent an email earlier today. I don't need to reiterate everything in the email, but what I would like to say, and I hope that the ordinance committee and subsequently the council will give every consideration to not solely looking at 5G or any other future generation technology as an economic development opportunity for Scarborough, but rather look at the ramifications at the same time, what it means in terms of expense of the local taxpayers. So I hope you will take all of this into consideration. I don't think anybody is against 5G. I just think that folks would like to see us be proactively protective in the areas that Councillor Gleistein has outlined in her amendments. So thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you, everyone who spoke. You all were awesome. You stuck with the time limits. I appreciate that very much. Again, if you have further testimony, so to speak, that you wish to submit, the address is towncouncil@scarboroughmaine.org. And it will go to all of the counselors, but we will make sure that we take a look at it. With that, I'm going to now proceed to the next portion. I'm going to ask Mr. Chase, who's our planner, who's been involved with this since day one, to kind of give us a reiteration and bring us up to date as to where we are. Jay, if you would.
Sure. I think a lot of what I was or will touch on maybe has already been stated, but maybe I can just try to give a little bit of the timeline. As was mentioned, my understanding, there was state statute was amended last summer of 2019. And actually, following that, I received an email from our IT director, sort of informing me and others in town that this change was occurring and this technology is sort of popping up across the country and something we might want to think about. Following that, we started to receive some phone calls from different providers, and so started to do a little bit of research to the best I could. A lot of that was provided to this ordinance committee in the winter, in terms of the background materials from the various folks that I was able to look through, the National League of Cities and those sorts of folks. And so, working through the fall and into the winter, staff drafted some ordinance language that was brought forward to this ordinance committee and worked through, as was mentioned in January. I think there were maybe 2 meetings of ordinance committee in which it was discussed, if I'm not mistaken, before it went to town council. So that's sort of the timeline. One of the things that's occurred sort of in the interim, where one, sort of the ordinance, it was unclear sort of the direction that we were going to go with the ordinance, and then also given sort of the confusion of COVID, we really took a step back and tried to have a better understanding of where we stood with the existing tools and regulations that the town has with regards to 5G, understanding that, as was mentioned, the state statute really refers to these type of facilities only within the public right-of-way. The town does have existing ordinance language, performance standards in our zoning ordinance for facilities that would be outside of the right-of-way, but with the state statute essentially usurping home rule over things in the public right-of-way, we tried to have a better understanding of what type of tools do we currently have given the regulations. And so we had a couple of different conversations with other communities as well as with the town attorney, and really sort of landed on the fact that at this point, the permitting process would really just be a requirement that an electrical permit be pulled, and that's to ensure that the work is being done by a licensed electrician. That's really all that process would be about. We don't have any current regulations for those facilities in the right of way. To date, we haven't received any applications for electric permit applications for 5G. It's come to our attention that it looks like there may be a few that have been installed around town, and we're trying to figure out exactly what's occurred there. I know Larissa has worked to reach out to Consolidated. Just to be frank, we, as town staff, the various departments, we always find it a little tricky to get communication from the utilities to figure out exactly what's going on. So we continue to endeavor to find out exactly what these facilities are. We've heard from a number of our neighboring communities that they're seeing them pop up as well, and they're not sure exactly what it is or who's doing it. So I think someone made mention of the fact that there may be some in town, and there may well be, and we're trying to figure out exactly what those are at this time.
Can I insert there, just for folks from the industry who are listening to this, if you could contact Jay, if you've got any idea what's going on, that would be real helpful. Because I've heard from constituents that there's some evil, nefarious stuff going on and the town's involved, and that's no. So I just want to make that very clear to anyone who's listening. That's it. Thank you. Sorry, Jay. Didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. I was really about, I think that sort of brings folks, that gives you the timeline of where it started and where we're at and what the town is currently doing, given, again, the current regulations as best we understand them, in consultation with our town attorney and other staff members. So happy to, of course, answer questions, but
great.
In terms of a update and timeline, that's what I have for you.
Mr. Hamill or Mr. Johnson, do you have questions or anything you want Jay to address in more detail at this point?
I did have one. I mean, I had a chance to talk with Jay the other day, and and have been working hard, I know, as the other committee members have, to get up to speed with late breaking suggestions on possible amendments and that sort of thing. So, but Jay, can you help us with, I know when you and I talked the other day, you talked in terms of the principles that we ought to have in mind in terms of, pursuing revisions to the ordinance. I know this goes back to January. There was actually some people who spoke this evening that go all the way back to that time. And when we were at that stage, we're working hard to try to get something on the books and go from there. And now we're hearing from people that, we've delayed things and we've extended the process, some things due to our control, others not. And we've now gone to great lengths to include input from the companies, from the telecoms companies, as well as from the public. So what we need is sort of time to process all this. But could you give us a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 bullet points on what are the main principles for us in your mind that we need to focus on as we look at these respective amendments and language changes?
That's a really good question. I've spent the afternoon trying to reading through the revisions that have been provided and trying to wrap my mind around it, as well as I readily admitted to this ordinance committee and anyone who will listen through this process. This is not 5G and this type of technology is not my area of expertise. So I really am trying to gain a better understanding. But certainly I know one of the I guess I would say a couple of if we're really thinking about policy objectives, I think where I'm seeing a little bit of a divide is really around placement of the facilities and what is the town's interest and or ability. And I think at this point, it's really good to understand what the ordinance committee's interest is, and then we can figure out ability in terms of location. And that has to do with a number of things. I think we've heard about separation from residences. There's concerns about certain scenic or ecological vistas have been raised in the past, among some other things. So really getting a good understanding from the ordinance committee members of what it is, what type of directive you'd like staff to try to work on before any proposals come back. That's one of the big ones. And then I think there's also, and I really am just trying to wrap my mind around it, as well as just ensuring that sort of the fee structure isn't being indiscriminatory. And maybe that means we're looking at either the fees that are proposed in this ordinance or potentially looking at fees in some of our existing ordinances to make sure that we have equity amongst those. And so again, like I said, I'm trying to wrap my mind around what all that means, but having a good understanding from the ordinance committee as to, yes, we think the numbers that are in here are right, and so that helps me understand it's an adjustment elsewhere, or which way we want to go there. So I think those are, I guess, if 2 things that pop to my mind. I'm certain there's others, but
great. So I heard 2 things: placement, and there's sort of subcategories of proximity to residents, ecological factors, and I might add aesthetics. The second one was fairness and equity, primarily as it results to fee structure, in this and other ordinances. One other one I might suggest we add is just to make sure that whatever process we're following is fair and equitable, not only to the providers, but also to our residents. And I know that can be very subjective, but I think those are good principles, Jay, and will help me at least trying to use that as a screen for what we're looking at in terms of amendments, language changes.
Mm-hmm. Is that it, Tom?
Thanks.
Yeah. Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, but similar to what Jay just mentioned, to be honest, let me level set. I strongly supported moving this from the council back to the committee because we heard some concerns from the citizens. And we had a councilor that was concerned but said that she had some amendments to do. Totally respect that, supported that. I received this document a day and a half ago. This is a rewrite, minimally. I'll be very honest with you. I've read it several times. I have not been able to process all this information. So I understand you hired an attorney. I know our counselor used town money for our attorney. So there was effort put in it. It's unfortunate. Everybody knew this meeting was going to be on this day, and we received a pretty intensive document, like I said, a day and a half ago. So I'm not sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to be clear. You're not talking about the industry notations. No. Are you talking about Councillor Gleistein? Okay, thank
correct.
you.
That's
okay. I just want to make sure. Yep.
That's correct. I mean, I appreciate the industry's input. but I serve the public, and I was more interested in the amendments that the public, working with our council, wanted to bring forward. So again, like I said, I'm not sure what to do with this. Awful lot of information to process. I definitely have not had time to process it. So where we go from here is probably up to the chair.
Yeah. Thanks. Gee, thanks, Counselor. No, I think I'm just looking at my notes here. Jay, you addressed the 5G in Oak Hill, that we don't know where that came from, and we're trying to track that down. And let's see. I think that was it for my notes and question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a couple follow-ups for Jay.
Sure.
Okay. In the amendments where I feel that were at least understandable and digestible by me, I think that possibly we should entertain, like the commonality of terms.
Yeah.
You know, licensing, permitting, where everything. So I think we can do that fairly simply. I was going to ask Jay if you could educate me on the difference between the terms license and permit, because I do understand that the utilities are licensed by the FCC and theoretically permitted to use right of way within the town. So could you help me understand the two terms?
Yeah, and I have to admit that I probably use those loosely and interchangeably throughout the license, throughout the ordinance, because the license, the ordinance is called the licensing. We call it the small wireless facility licensing ordinance, but in there, then I talk about a permit. And so I need to sort of go back through. I thought that was a good pickup. Yeah, I think I use those loosely, interchangeably to really mean the same thing, but I need to take a look at that more closely.
Yeah, and that's easy to be. If you don't mind, I'm just going to continue, Katerina, since we.
Oh, absolutely. No, this is what this is for. Go ahead.
Okay. In the purpose section, now let's get down to the definitions. Number 6, in the suggested ordinance amendments, how would you define a decorative pole in number 6? Because I'll tell you a lot of the theme I had in reading it, and I have read this several times, I found an awful lot of the wording so subjective, I was surprised this went through legal, to tell you the truth. And let me tell you why I come with it. I'm the president of a neighborhood association, and we have covenants and restrictions, and we have similar terminology, and it causes a lot of problems. Like, you cannot build outside your home if it's not within the harmony of the neighborhood. You know, what's that mean?
Yeah.
Who defines that? You know?
Yeah,
so anyway.
I just want to be sure, because I know you mentioned about going through legal review. So the language that was received from Councilor Gleistein has not been sent to our town's attorney, and I also have just started reviewing it. So
okay.
So I think we can.
Okay, so
I guess I understand Councilor Gleistein's going to have an opportunity to speak, and maybe she can answer that question. But I would generally read the term decorative pole, I think, together with the term right after about a pole. And I'm trying to think of poles that are in the town's right of way that are designed and placed only for aesthetic purposes. And I'm
okay. Well, you know why I'm asking you, right? I mean, this is, if folks come to the council and they get their initial approval, then you're the administrative review. So it would actually be you and your staff making these determinations. That's the way I look at it. Number 10 in the definitions, is it wise to list exclusions?
Again, I guess I would, like you, like a little bit more time. I have reviewed the language, but I don't know.
And again, I'm just trying to think, pulled from, we do have lots of ordinances, and I know a lot of them filter through planning. So I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I figured that, you know, some of this you may have experienced before in other ordinances with other things. So definitely wasn't putting you on the spot.
Yep. Nope.
So maybe like you said, you wrapping your head around it. I said, I still have not digested this. Maybe we definitely need some time to do that. I don't know how we're going to do that with the chair, but I think one thing we should think about also is the abutter notice. You know, that's my favorite topic with development. That should be fairly easy to do. And just out of the respect of the abutters, they should be notified. So anyway, as a thought. So I'll leave it there, Katerina. I think you know where my mindset is.
Yep, I do. Thank you. Mr. Hamel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on some of the points that Ken made. You know, I share his, you know, frustration with, you know, not being able to process all of this stuff, you know, in the time frame that we have. You know, so this has been a long road with this thing, and we own that. Okay, we put it to the council, and then we asked it to come back out of council, back into committee, in response to public feedback, in response to public outcry. That's the reason why we did that, and I think we've been fair in terms of soliciting feedback from the providers as well as from the public, and we've got a lot from the public and a fair amount from the providers as well. So I think that I think it's be very hard for us to kind of start dialing through specific language, and I know we've had some conversation about that previously. Whether we're doing that in committee or council, it's painful. It's a painful exercise to do that, but I'd rather that we make the time to do that properly. I know we haven't heard yet from Betsy, who's going to try to walk through all of that, I think, from the public side. But I think that there's easily, a half a dozen or so things on both sides of this issue that we can do a much better job with putting it down and come out with a much better product. So I just think we need to be given time to do that. And to be honest, I'm very frustrated when I hear from the public that, and these are times where we really tend to have two sides on every issue, and us in the middle getting our ears boxed from both sides. And that's why we're here for the glory, and we signed up for this. But I'd like to say that those two things cannot be true, that we haven't spent enough time on it, or that we've been delaying it and letting companies install things under our nose. Those two things cannot be true. I respect and frustration and try to understand the perception, but we really can't blame ourselves for both of those things. You're giving this the old college try to do the best that we can with the time that we have, with what we know at the time. So I would just ask people to please be patient with us on both sides of the issue, not throw us out with the bathwater. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to, I also agree with my fellow counselors that it was frustrating to have a whole ordinance rewrite put in front of me a couple of days ago. But that being said, it was, and it is, and there you go. And I've been honest with people since day one. If nothing else, I hope people realize I'm very honest. I'll tell you what I think. And it's very frustrating. This has been in front of this council since January and didn't hear from anybody, didn't see anybody and whatnot. But that being said, I think the time now, Ms. Gleistein, Councilor Gleistein, are you there? If I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do a presentation on what your amendments are, and then we're going to turn it back over to the committee. So Larissa, if you would work with Betsy to figure out what we're doing here.
Hello.
Hi, Bets.
Hi. So Larissa, do you want to try my screen sharing? I can try that. If not,
as a panelist, Betsy, you should have permission to screen share on your own.
Okay.
Give it a try.
It's hiding though. Hang on a sec. I don't like Zoom screen sharing. I use another one at work. So, all right, screen. Let me
I also
Betsy,
have your
it should be
PowerPoint
down.
ready to go.
Yeah, it should be down in the middle.
Right
At
by
the
the
bottom
share.
bar, it
I
says share screen.
see it, but I'm just trying to figure out maybe how to make sure I do it right.
Oh,
Okay, did that work?
Yep.
Yeah,
yes, it did.
you're there.
Okay, all right, now did that get it full screen or, I mean, this is what happens.
Well, as long as we can see each of the
Did
slides.
that
There
work?
you go. There you go.
Okay, all right, thanks, guys. I so appreciate it. I appreciate your time. You know, I definitely sympathize with everything you're saying. When I got into this, I had no idea the complexity. I think one thing we kind of want to know here is that when you have 3 lawyers and a state rep or state person on a meeting, that means it's probably a pretty big deal and it's probably a pretty complex issue. And so that's what I found when I got into it. And I found, as you'll see, maybe some holes in our ordinance, as well as I think, I have not seen those Verizon amendments that Mr. Cohen mentioned. And I think the state person mentioned too, Jean Marie. So I'm not sure what those were, but I have not seen those.
We will post them. That was an oversight not to post that. So
okay,
it will be
yeah, no
posted.
problem. And it may cross over some of the stuff I did. I don't know. So I apologize if I speak incorrectly about that. Jay mentioned one of the things Jay first sent us was information from NLC. So that was in our packet originally. That was one of the first things I ever saw about 5G. I now know more than I've ever wanted to know in my life. Interestingly enough, NLC is now joined in lawsuits with several cities, not just one city. It's all been put up into one lawsuit, but it's because NLC feels like municipalities, counties, local government is not getting the input they need on this. And so I'm not going to go into all the law stuff because I'm not a lawyer, but I found that quite interesting. So let me just kind of jump in here. So I'm not going to read all of these. These are kind of the areas that the amendments went into, but I've got them down one at a time. So I'm just going to slip that screen. So just because you can't read that, you're going to see it on each of the next screens. So I'll just go forward here. So one of the things when I first started looking at the amendment was I think Mr. Smith, Attorney Smith, kind of pointed out some more standard protections that we may be missing. One of the big things I did that really came forward kind of late in the process was discover that Lewiston has put an ordinance in, and it really provided a lot of kind of what I would call standard protections, some of which Mr. Smith mentioned, and I think we'll probably want to consider as a committee and as a town. But just for example, I'll just give a couple of those, and that is a permit duration. So I don't think that we want a vendor to be able to just take out a permit, not do the construction, but take up a permit. So for example, if AT&T, says, well, we'd like to, we're going to apply for, 17 permits, and Verizon's just, out of luck because of how we get the ordinance written or whatever, and they don't build out. Well, what happens? So I think that was kind of a thing. So I call that kind of a standard protection. We've already mentioned the standard protection. There's just so many examples like communities in Sandy Spring where folks are just showing up at home and these things are kind of in the middle of their front yard. And in that case, Verizon actually did agree to give notice and did not give notice, but there was nothing in the ordinance to penalize them for that or something like that. So I think that's something we really want to think about. There was one clause in the ordinance that said if we had to do something as a town to change a road, to add a turn lane, that is our purview. That's what we need to do to take care of our town. And we had put in our ordinance that we would move these units at our expense. Lewiston took the exact opposite approach and said, we'll inform you when those need to be moved and you'll do it at your expense. I think that's probably a better take, at least from me as a taxpayer and a council member. So I think there's still some other things that are needed. And, we don't have time tonight to get into things that are in the non-right of way, but our current ordinance, which is 405, does have a lot of protections, but there may be a couple of tweaks we want to make so that those things apply as well to those in the non-right of way. So I'm kind of talking fast, but I'm just going to move on here. So why does it matter? You know, one of the things that's becoming really clear is that where there's strong ordinances, this is going well. Where there's weak ordinances, it's not. And that's because the aesthetics is really up to the locality. And this is basically like the Wild West. This is a huge deal. Everybody wants better internet. We could get that without 5G with more cell towers, but that's not the direction of the technology. So that's awesome. You know, these are things that are coming, but it is the Wild West. The AT&T, Verizon, they're hiring contractors. The standards are all not getting out there. So that's one reason it's really important. We want to protect, there's language in my amendments to protect our scenic venues and our ecological natural resources. That language actually came from some language Jay gave me when he was helping me. And one of the things Lewiston had done that we did not do is protect any of our historical resources. You know, we don't want to see one of our buildings that we've put on our list of historic buildings, you know, have a giant tower right in front of it, a pole. So are there others still needed? I don't know. I think there might be. The biggest area that I found a problem with, and I know folks are saying wholesale changes, but I think I was able to incorporate them into, it wasn't like I took out sections or moved sections. I think the way Jay had the sections lined out, I was able to incorporate these in this, is if you think about the neighborhoods that have all underground utilities and no light poles, which is my neighborhood, the neighborhood next to me, it might be Ken's neighborhood, maybe you have light poles. These things are actually taller than light poles. So I'm showing a few pictures here of, you know, very aesthetic looking units. They're still quite large. You can see how close this one is to this house, to these homes. You can see if you came home one day and that one on the left was in front of your house, that is a nice decorative light pole. They did not put the utilities underground, but then it goes up higher. If you came home and there were several like on the right, you might not be, you know, quite as happy, especially if you were looking at that as your front door. The one in the center here, if you were looking at that at your top window, you can see this person has a for sale sign. The little thing that looks like a mailbox, that's actually some wiring. That's also the same on the left. So what I really found in our language was that for the new poles, especially the residential areas that did not have any utilities at all, we really didn't offer the protections. Lewiston went much further and put things underground for that, or said you had to incorporate them in the decorative light poles. But in those areas where we don't even have light poles, we really didn't address that, and we didn't address that. So
Betsy, you have
really
3 minutes. I'm giving you a 3-minute warning.
Yep, I'm at 7. Yep, I see that. So at the lowest height possible distance from residents, we don't want these things to proliferate. So that's in the ordinances, because what if you had several of these poles right next to each other, one for Verizon, one for T-Mobile, one for AT&T, emitting radiation. Syracuse is doing a lot of work on that in conjunction with Verizon. They're measuring radiation output, as well as Brussels, Belgium.
Betsy, you may have missed the beginning.
Yeah,
I'll give
no,
you
I
your
didn't.
time back here.
Marie, I'm
where
just talking about.
I said, please don't talk about health issues.
That's not health. I'm talking about cities that are measuring radiation.
So
we have and noise, and so these are some of the things that we want to make sure that we've included. I've included most of these. I only learned about the radiation one recently by Syracuse and Brussels, but these are all that fits into that section that I added. Okay, so we've seen that. So what are smart moves and best practices? Well, one of the things I saw was the standalone ordinance, the way we're doing it. As we go through this in the future, that's great for doing it now. But the smartest ordinances are kind of combining all the ordinances into one instead of having everything spread apart. So they're combining a pole ordinance with a transmission ordinance that includes both the right-of-way and non-right-of-way. We're not looking at doing that right now, but I would suggest that for the future. And why would I suggest that? Because that's going to give us the most flexibility and protection as technology and laws change. We want to keep an eye on lawsuits. The towns have largely won already as protecting aesthetic and environmental and historical structures. There's a lawsuit in the Second Circuit right now based on fees. I've not brought anything forward with fees. I thought the fees were fine. Jay mentioned fees, so maybe he has some input on that. And then, as I said, in the Ninth Circuit, they're pretty much questioning everything. So this would be future. And I didn't get it on this particular slide, but my suggestion for moving forward would be an all council workshop. Even though this was brief and people were only speaking briefly, I hope that what I've been able to do is at least give you a brief idea of how complex this is. And like I said, when I started, if you have, 3 attorneys and a state person in an ordinance meeting, you better believe it's a big deal for a town. And so I think a workshop where we could, go through these one by one and mark them up or take them out. We could do a better process, and that would be helpful. And if we do it at the all workshop level, that'll get us all on the same page for the second read and the vote. Finally, I will say I do feel like the town needs to push back on the ones that have already been installed. This is one here by AT&T. I do believe, despite what I've heard from the town attorney, that they do require a permit. And I think it's really important that the town
Betsy, your time is
let
up.
these proliferate without some pushback, because heaven knows who could come in and put things
Betsy,
on
your
hold.
time is up. Betsy, your time is up. Thank you. Okay. Do you have a sentence to finish?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. If we could.
Hey, Jean Marie, you muted yourself, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Sorry, thank you. You would think I would know how to do this by now, huh? Thank you very much, Betsy. That was a very comprehensive. I know you were trying to whip through it. It's not easy to do. I haven't given testimony in my past life up in the legislature and whatever, and to be under the gun, but we will, definitely take a look at those slides and whatever that you presented. Jay, I think what I would like to do is go back to Jay. Jay, if you could talk about, it's my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, I thought at some point, because again, this process has been going on for a while, that you have spoken to planners from other places in the state. Could you talk a little bit about that? Do you mind?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as I typically do when issues come up, I reach out to colleagues in the profession to sort of see what others are up to, what they've learned and gleaned. Frankly, I found that a lot of towns and a lot of my colleagues in the planning profession have not started to deal with this issue. But I did talk to the planning director up in Lewiston. He mentioned, he really wasn't too involved with their process. That was really led by their public works department. But the way it was described to me is that, and I'm guessing probably because of their density and population, density, that they were probably getting a lot more interest early on. And my understanding is their public works department found an ordinance online that sort of aligned with what they were looking to do, and that was what they utilized to move forward with. And that my understanding is there wasn't too much discussion, but that's as I understand it. The other community I was able to reach out to, or not just reach out to, but really get some good feedback, who had been working on these type of issues, was Old Orchard Beach. I had an opportunity to chat with their assistant planner. The planning director turned me to the assistant planner. And he mentioned, so I mentioned earlier in the meeting that our local ordinance actually precludes putting these on distribution poles. So our local ordinance is out of compliance with the state statute. So we had a little bit different track. In Old Orchard Beach, their ordinance, their telecommunications ordinance actually allows for these. So they put 5G facilities, go through their planning board review process, and sort of through their whole telecommunications ordinance review. I haven't looked at what that ordinance is, but I imagine it's sort of a similar planning board process like we have here in town ourselves. The feedback I heard from them was their staff and their planning board were actually felt that was a burdensome process, and they wanted to get away from having that level of review for these type of facilities. I don't know if they've moved forward with that. That was a conversation I've had with them back in, I believe it was, I think April, when, so I don't know if they, my guess is like many of us, you know, COVID has probably taken up other time, but anyway. So those are really the two communities that I heard directly from that have started, you know, working on it. Interestingly, within the last week or two, our department received an email from South Portland saying, hey, what are you guys doing? We're starting to see these pop up in town and we don't know what to do with these. So, it sounds like they're just starting to think about it over in South Portland. And again, a number of the other communities where I'd spoken to my colleagues, they have basically said, yeah, no, we're not, we haven't started thinking about them. And so they said, let us know what you figure out.
Gee, thanks.
So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, I think that's the only question I have with that. Again, I'm gonna go back to my fellow counselors, committee members. Counselor Johnson, do you have?
Yeah, I had a whole list of questions for Jay, but again, too much now to digest. I agree with Councilor Gleisning. This would be a great workshop. That's actually what I thought we were going to do tonight, but you can't do that when you receive the voluminous ordinance a day and a half before the meeting, and people do know better. So sorry if I'm expressing my frustration with that. I would sign on to a workshop. I don't know where you're going to put it in. Next month is growth. And I'll be very honest, growth is a higher priority of things in my life on this town council right now. I don't know if that means we move it forward, we approve it, and we amend it just to get something on the books that maybe we can mitigate some of the Wild Wild West that's going on. I'm not sure. That's where I am. Open for suggestions.
Okay, thank you. Dawn, go ahead.
I share many of the same points that Ken made. We need the time to do a good job on this. I know Jay has highlighted some of the, the difficulties with where we are right now. I've lived through trying to do this real time with the council in a workshop, trying to do real time editing of amendments for ordinances. It is painful. However, I think that's the work that needs to be done. What I'd like to suggest, and I don't know, what authority we have as a committee, would it be possible for us to convene a small working group, somebody from the folks that Betsy, is shepherding, and someone from, the telecoms, and somebody from Jay's group, and to spend, several hours and hammer out what the proposed amendments might be, for us to revisit as a committee and quickly get back in front of the council as soon as possible. Without doing that real work, that, it's like, it literally is like pulling teeth, but that's the work we need to do. I think there are easily, as I mentioned before, 3 to 6 very solid things that could be worked into either side, that I think there's plenty of room for a compromise here that would be broadly supported, hopefully by the interest groups and also by the council as well. And I think the committee, we, just in our conversation tonight, we see how, there may be a cluster of things that are coming together for us to help move forward. So I don't know, that's a kind of a messy suggestion, but I think that's the work that needs to be done in one way. I don't know if we've done anything like that in the past.
Okay, I can answer you in my history with the council. I have not seen that work gets done in committees. And again, this has been in front of this committee now for a while. Here's where I'm coming from with this. Frankly, I think this ordinance is a great first stab at this. And my ears perked up when I heard Mr. Johnson say, well, we could, put this back, and correct me if I'm misquoting you, Ken, or I misunderstood you, okay? But that we could put this back to council with a second reading, with some amending, get something passed so that we've got something out there. right now, because you're right, it's the Wild West out there. We don't know what's going on. We have no ordinance. There's just nothing. My concern is missing out on fees. I will tell you that I do get where the telecom guys and gals are coming from with, you got to be careful in discrimination with fees. I think we need to raise all the fees, bring them right up to, you know, so they're all even at this level. And, you know, this ordinance, these amendments that Ms. Gleisten has brought forward, it's like rewriting the whole darn thing. And there's a lot in it that I think is a bit extraneous. I know people won't believe this knowing my background, but I'm not one for over-regulating the world either. I think that, you know, enough's enough. There's a fine line there between allowing people to do their business, run their businesses, and, you know, and then saying, but, you know, you got to do 3 inches there and 5 inches here, and just over controlling. And I know people are like, you're saying that, Jean Marie, you? But my initial thought coming out of this meeting today is there's a lot here. I would like to potentially see our town attorney review some of the what came out of the telecoms. I mean, they didn't have a whole lot of changes, to be honest with you. There was a lot of wordsmithing that went on with what I saw, but I'm not an attorney. I've definitely worked with legislative, this is state legislative lawmaking in my deep dark past, enough to know that that was not huge changes. It looked like it, but it wasn't. Their concerns were, the major concerns were the discriminatory aspects. And I have to agree with them. You know, you've got to treat all these utilities on the poles the same way. I mean, otherwise, you know, you're opening yourself up to some real issues. So I would like to maybe perhaps see it go back. I know Jay's going, oh, please, no, don't send it back to me. But I would like to see Jay get a chance to digest this, with the attorney getting a chance to digest it. And then we can make a decision whether it should be workshopped or not with the council, but it's not going to happen until fall. I mean, it's just not. So that's where I'm coming from. Mr. Hamill, I see you.
Yeah, I'm you know, I know we're all committed to do the right thing here, to try to find a product that's going to work, and it will be swift and fair and equitable. So I think, so I just want to stay with that for a minute. Is there a way for us to try to whittle this down? You know, I'd be happy to serve as a point of contact for the ordinance committee to work on the proposed amendments that could come back to the council for a decision. I'm kind of on the fence about a workshop. There's a way for us to, you know, to do the pick and shovel work and get it in a form that we think would be supported, you know, with after Jay's input from the attorneys and some of the technical things. And we aim to get it back, you know, in front of the council or back in front of this committee to tee up for the council in September. Yeah, I have time and energy for this. I'd be willing to volunteer to help with that, do the wordsmith. Betsy has energy for this as well, and you know, has worked on stuff. Sure, we have from the telecoms group that, you know, they could.
Ken, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to, because I don't think you meant to say this, but I just want to go on the record. I appreciate the association's attorneys looking at our ordinance and giving us feedback, but you know, I'm old school. That's the fox guarding the chicken coop. Okay, my interest is protecting our residents, hopefully leveraging some of the suggestions from both groups and coming to it. But I like the scenario you just mentioned with maybe Don being a point person. Gives us time to digest, Jay digest, our attorney review, and then I think we could do something. Yeah. For that.
I agree. And no, I didn't mean to sound like I'm allowing, I want the fox guarding the chicken house. Trust me, hen house, no way. But you do have to be aware of that when you're drafting legislation, because you also don't want to get into situations where you've got the lawyers fighting with, saying, I want to prevent as much as we can up front from either side. Let's make this, a good. And I think that Councillor Gleisteen and our constituents, some of the constituents, I can't even talk now, constituents had some great points regarding, I hadn't thought about, ongoing permitting, like what does that mean? So this is why I would like to make the suggestion, and I could make it in a motion if you'd like, that we send forward the work Betsy's done, the notes we got from the telecom, send them back to Jay and Phil Saucier, who's our attorney, get some review. Dawn, in the meantime, will play point person. I appreciate you doing that, Dawn, because I am going away here shortly. Not far, but I am going away. Then let's come back. Let's shoot for September-ish. I don't know if we're going to need a workshop or not, but we can make that decision at that point. Let's see what we get out of that and what makes sense without rebuilding Rome, so to speak, and come up with a good solution. Does that make sense to you guys?
Was
Feedback?
that a motion?
Oh yeah.
Did you
let's
catch
sort of-
all that?
I know, Larissa, did you catch that?
I did. Can I interject though, just very
Yes.
quickly?
Yes.
I want to make sure. So I think I'm getting the sense of what you'd like to have happen. What I think I want to make sure that we are doing for Jay and Phil, who you're asking to do some of this, is there's been no policy direction though. So if we send to Jay and Phil the existing ordinance, the ordinance is amended by Councillor Gleisteen and input that has been provided by the telecom industry, Jay and Phil will get to look at all of that, but they won't have direction from you as the elected body as to what you want them to do with it. And so I think that that's just something that I want to be sensitive to, please.
Thank you, Larissa. I was actually going to make that because
thank you.
There's I think I did hear general agreement by the members of the ordinance committee around public notification and having interest in seeing some language inserted in the language there. I felt like I heard commonality there. One of the bigger points, and back to what Don sort of said in my reading this afternoon, as I've started to try to collect what those differences are, is really around what is the interest in terms of the town having requirements around location of the facilities.
Yeah.
Is that something that we want to try to craft some language around, or really, I guess really looking for direction? That was one of the main elements that I think there's vast difference, frankly, in the two drafts that we received. I'm certain there's others, but that's one of the ones that jumps out to me.
Councillor Hamel?
If I heard Betsy correctly, her number one issue is placement. I'm assuming, I read that as sort of like location.
Yeah.
I get exactly what she's saying, and in the neighborhood where I used to live, Hidden Creek, there were no poles in the neighborhood. All the electric, you had these substation boxes. So, and if you come home and you see those poles like that, I don't know if there is a way to put 5G underground, but I get that. I get that thing. That's that is an aesthetic issue. It was very clear. And it's some of the other factors, I know she referenced ecological factors, but also, Jay touched on the fee structure, fairness and equity. I think the providers talked about the equity issue, and also the permitting thing, permitting versus licensing. So I think there's like 2 or 3 things on either side like that are sure things we can work on. And I don't know if that's not a lot of policy direction, but I think we want something that's going to be fair and equitable, that provides notification to the public, including abutters, and that we have a process. And I think, Jay, you referred to this as an administrative process that allows us to require people to apply and then to be held to to standards in terms of, how those things are implemented and removed if need be, and that we are protected in terms of not only the fees we can collect, but also the expenses associated with installing these things. Those are I think if we had that get 80% of it, it's not going to be perfect. We're going to have new stuff over the transom. So I don't,
Right.
that's what.
And I don't want it. I hate to say keep it simple, stupid, because that sounds foolish, but I'd like to keep it as straightforward as we can. And I like your thinking, Dawn, regarding, and I've jotted this down. Let's see if I've captured it too. And Larissa, you can listen in here and let us know. I've got notification of abutters, placement, fees, permitting, licensing, and administrative process for both in application and standards. Does that sound right?
That's what I heard.
Okay.
With a special emphasis on the location placement discussion being also specific to neighborhoods where they are wire-free neighborhoods.
Yes, okay, yep. Yep. Ken, you want to weigh in?
That sounds good to me. That's
all right.
Narrowing the focus. I think it's hitting the core points. And again, as this thing evolves and we need to adjust, we'll adjust.
Yeah.
So, Councillor Katarina, I believe that we have an inchoate motion on the floor that I have written down as follows. Move to send forward the Councillor Gleistein work, notes from the telecom industry and existing ordinance to Jay and Phil for review. I would add in the section of bullets that we've just listed, being the highlight of the review. Councillor Hamel to play the role of point person with the intent to come back in September for ordinance committee review of the outcome of that effort.
Yes, that's a motion.
Jay has
his hand up. Sorry, Jay.
That's quite okay. Just trying to be sensitive to the budget and our attorney's review of this. If based on sort of I think it's the 5 items that were just identified from notification, location, fee structure, verbiage, permitting process. What I might try to do before sending everything to our attorney is to take a bite at the apple, maybe work with Don to say, Don, do you think, we're in the right direction? And then send that material to our attorney, because as I think someone already mentioned, if, basically I could send the materials to the attorney and he could say, yep, one side say one thing and one side. So I guess I would just like to try to take a bite at it, and I'd provide him everything, of course, and say, here's my attempt at finding the middle ground of these items, or maybe it's not a middle ground of going one policy directive than the other, whatever the case may be.
Good thought, Jay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah. Can I go further than that with Jay? Agreed. Our legal budget does tend to be a bit of a giant oftentimes. And I think that if you guys felt comfortable with this, could it be that it went to legal review after the ordinance committee review in September? So Jay and Don work together, they come up with an amended form. Once we know that it's what you as elected officials are looking for, then we spend the money to have it cleared by council.
Yep, sounds good. So we're amending.
I'm taking Phil out of your motion, Jean Marie.
That's fine. So done, so amended.
Okay.
You could call this a 5G, to use a cooking analogy, a 5G small cell wireless reduction.
Jeez.
I thought you were going to say too many cooks were spoiling the broth, Don.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Everyone clear on where we're at? Can we have a vote, please? Mr. Hamel?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Katarina is a yes. So with that, I think we've got our next steps. Let's plan on September. I like to give people, a focal point. Regretfully, Larissa won't be with us in September. Just so the audience knows, we are losing Larissa Crockett to the town of Wells. She's going to be the new town manager there, and I'm it's our great loss, but I'm very happy for her, and I thank you very much for everything you've done, Larissa, for this committee.
Thank you,
God
Dean.
knows, I don't know what I'm going to do without you, but hey, there we go. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And with that, is there anything I'm forgetting other than a motion to adjourn? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'd like to thank you for a tightly run
Oh,
motion to make a motion to adjourn. Thank you. Well,
I second that.
you would second that? Okay, a vote. Mr. Hamel,
yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
and Ms. Katarina is a yes. Thank you, everybody. We'll be working on this. I would remind the public, email us with your thoughts and ideas. And I appreciate everyone's time tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.